Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC, and your host. We're back to China this week. Since the outbreak of the Wuhan virus, which is the correct name for COVID-19, the U.S. appears to have awakened to threats posed by China to Western interests, both here and in the Pacific region. Before we go to our guest, Guermantes Lailari, who's going to discuss the potential for Chinese military action near Taiwan sooner than we think it might happen, let me give you our JPC commercial. We were established in 1985 as a 501c3 organization, providing analysis of both foreign and domestic policies. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles and see our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The summer issue is up right now, and I think you'll find it interesting. You can also find all of the webinars you missed. So that's jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. None of this right to exist stuff. We support legitimacy and security for the state of Israel. We also strongly protest the U.S. government interference in the domestic affairs of our ally, Israel. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. A reminder, you can ask questions during the program. We monitor the Q&A function. And now our guest. Guermantes Lailari is a retired U.S. Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in the Middle East and Europe, as well as counterterrorism, irregular warfare, and missile defense. He studied, worked, and served in the Middle East and North Africa for over 14 years, and in Europe for 6 years. He has also worked and traveled in Asia. He was the U.S. Air Force attaché in the Middle East and served in Iraq. After retiring from the Air Force, he worked as a contractor in a variety of positions, including for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict, and managed a forward-based missile defense radar. He holds advanced degrees in international relations and strategic intelligence, researching authoritarian and totalitarian regimes that threaten the U.S., including examining the strategies and policies of authoritarian regimes in China, Russia, and Iran, which is what brings him to us today. He joined the JPC as a fellow in 2021. He was a Taiwan Fellow in Taipei during 2022 and is a visiting scholar at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. And he joins us from Taiwan today, where apparently it is now a few minutes into Thursday in the middle of the night. So thank you for doing that. And Guermantes Lailari, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot, Shoshana. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in a JPC seminar, and I welcome questions as we go through this process. What I'll do is, if it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and we can proceed. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's see here. Go. Share. Let me bring it to the top here. Let's see here. Sorry. Okay. So let me just tell you a little story. Let's start off with that. I've been studying China full-time for the last 2.5 years, and I've been in Taiwan for 1.5 years. And I wouldn't be talking about this without some strong indicators that I found in my research recently as I was looking at something that was totally, I thought was innocent, but in fact became very serious. So the first thing I noticed in my research, I was studying the laws that were passed in China over the last couple of years, and the laws were being passed, let's say, every 4-6 months time frame. You'd had another law be passed, and it would seem pretty at a good pace of passing laws in China, major laws. And then in March and April and June and July, there was a massive number of laws passed suddenly. And I thought that was odd. So I thought, well, what else is going on that's odd? And after a lot of looking around, I found lots of interesting information, obviously. But the main thing I thought about was, what is it that Xi Jinping or Xi is worried about with respect to Taiwan? Well, ultimately, he wants Taiwan to be part of China. It never was part of the communist China, but it's sort of a legacy issue that from Mao. And Mao tried to take Taiwan a couple of times in the Civil War in '49, and also during the '50s. He had plans to do it, and it was stopped as a result of the Korean War, et cetera, et cetera. So he really wants Taiwan to be part of China. In fact, it's so important. It's number 3 on the list of core interests of the CCP. Excuse me, the CCP. So there are basically two issues that, or 2 ways that Taiwan can be part of China. One is, this is according to the 2005 anti-succession law. Again, going back to the law, there's two methods: peaceful means and non-peaceful means. The peaceful means basically means that the people here voluntarily submit to China. That's the peaceful means. There were several attempts during the former President Ma's administration, prior to the current president's 2 terms that she's been in power. President Ma tried to push Taiwan to get closer and closer to China, and finally there was a revolt, the Sunflower Movement, and they pushed him back out of that. So the problem is the trend here for the communist regime is that the people here are, surprise, enjoying democracy. And so that trend of working to get the people here convinced that the PRC is a paradise isn't working. There are a lot of things that they're doing. They're using propaganda. They're using all kinds of illicit means and bribes and many different things, but it's not working. So the other method, which is the non-peaceful means, which is a code word for war, but they can't use the word war because war is between 2 countries, and China does not view Taiwan as a country. They view it as a bad boy province, a province that should be part of China, but it's not. So non-peaceful means means basically either invading or blockading or doing some kind of strikes and forcing the government here to capitulate. So as a result of Xi Jinping's actions of scaring people in the region, for example, as when they took Hong Kong, and they changed the timeline for their taking over it from, I think it was 50 years from the date that they signed the accord with the British. China accelerated that to like just a few years. So in 2020 timeframe, there were riots, and so that was a mistake, and that woke up some people, including people here in Taiwan. There's many mistakes. I'm just going to highlight 3 of them. So the second one, of course, is everyone knows about the Pelosi visit last year, where the PLA launched missiles, and they did all kinds of aggressive activity around Taiwan, flew aircraft, ships, did missile tests, did live fire exercises, basically, did a lot of activity to express their disappointment that former Speaker Pelosi didn't kowtow to the CCP. The third time was in April this year when President Tsai was visiting a South American country, and on her way back, she met with Speaker McCarthy in the Reagan Center in California. And they, again, when she came back, they did this massive military exercise. So as a result of that, the US government passed a law in the end of December called the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023. And in that law, it says that the US military will be helping Taiwan's military with training, encourages training and encourages conducting exercises. And also we have all these weapons that are supposed to be coming here to Taiwan in the next couple of years, about $19 billion of backlog of weapons. So this trend, as a result of the Communist Party's action, the trend of training the military for the first time officially since 1979 is a new deal. It is a new thing for Taiwan, where there are Americans military here, several hundred, that are working with all the services here to help them improve their military. Now, Xi Jinping remembers that the US government did the same thing in Ukraine in 2017 when President Trump approved lethal training to the Ukrainian military. President Obama and the Congress passed the law that Congress authorized the president to allow lethal training, but Obama did not allow that. So now we have lethal training from 2017 till 2022, and Putin's war didn't go the way it was supposed to go. So that's a problem if the US military is now training the military here. So that's a trend that is bad for the second option that he has, the non-peaceful means. And the longer that the US military is here training, the worse it gets for the potential of a quick and easy win for Xi. Becomes potentially bogged down in a World War I type scenario, trench warfare or something like that. So let me just go through here. So the other problem is he's also not sure about the PLA. We've read lots of articles about generals being fired and replaced by more purist communists as opposed to technocrats, which is what the rocket forces was full of, was technocrats, people with expertise in science, or the Space Force under the Strategic Support Force. All these generals were more technocrats than they were, let's say, hardcore communists. The PLA hasn't really done anything successful in the last, let's say, 20 plus years. The war in 1979 with Vietnam wasn't a stellar result for the PLA. They lost a lot of troops and they eventually withdrew, although they did achieve the fact that the Vietnamese pulled out of Cambodia, but the fact is that they lost pretty heavily. And then, of course, we have lots of different little tiffs between Vietnam later on in the 70, before that in 74, and then later on with some ships in the what I call the Southeast Asian Sea, which other people call the South China Sea. But the point is that they really haven't done anything significant, and so he doesn't really know if they're going to be successful. So we have a situation here where over time it's going to get harder and harder for the PLA to be successful to take Taiwan in a non-peaceful means. There's a backlog of weapons that are going to be coming here over the next couple of years. So based on that, I started thinking about, okay, so what does this all mean? Well, what happens if he has to figure out a way to stop this? And how does he do that? He does that by creating leverage. He has to do something that will force the Americans to negotiate. He also has to be careful he doesn't start World War III. So it's something in between, right? So what I sort of suggest is that perhaps there's a solution to his problem that he's already thought about. And in Taiwan, and people who've studied Taiwan know, and people who've studied the PLA know that there's been a lot of talk over the years about Protus Island. And Protus Island is a small island south by southwest of Taiwan, and I'll show you a map here shortly. That is only occupied by military forces. There's no civilians on the island, and it would be kind of like a package that he could perhaps do something there, and initiate some kind of negotiations with the United States. I studied some of the negotiating techniques that the Chinese have used in the past, the Chinese communists, and they're pretty hardcore, and they don't really back off, and they're pretty much, they negotiate to get what they want, and they don't really care about the other side. It's not a win-win type scenario that a lot of people talk about. This is totally win-lose or win I don't care kind of scenario. So let me show you a picture of the. So here's a picture of Taiwan, the main island here, and then there's some islands along the coast of China that Taiwan owns. There's Matsu. There's a series of small islands called Matsu. There's actually a significant number of people there. I'll tell you about this, about the numbers. There's Wushu, and then there's Kinmen. And Kinmen has the largest civilian population and military of these islands along the coast of China. Now, this island set is called Penghu, and it's quite a large group of islands. It's fairly close to Taiwan. And then there's Protus in this map here. You see Taiwan's here, and it's pretty close. It's much closer to China actually, but it's pretty far away from Taiwan. But it's certainly it could basically would control the approaches of the South China Sea and southern part of Taiwan. And then there's another island that Taiwan owns. It's called Taiping, or Itu Abu, and this island is in the Spratly Islands. You know, there's a whole bunch of islands there, and a lot of people, a lot of countries have militarized those islands: Vietnam, China, Taiwan, Philippines, etc. So if you look at these islands, again, my hypothesis is that he needs to test the PLA, that he needs to stop the training of the ROC, and he needs to stop or slow down the weapons going to Taiwan. So this theory I have is possibly wrong, but I do believe strongly that he needs to stop the training and the weapons deliveries. He might think of something else, okay? But I'm going with this theory because I think it's the most logical and probably has the least risk for him. Because if he starts doing something else, then it might bring in other countries. Like if he did something with a Senkaku or with some Philippine island, then we have a problem where the U.S. government is obligated to interfere. Whereas with Taiwan, there is no obligation. We have this thing called strategic ambiguity, which means that basically we decide if we want to play or not. Right. So, and here's a more zoomed in picture of Taiwan here, and then Protus Island is down at the lower left-hand corner. So, all right. Let me show you. Here's a graph of the population of these different island sets, how big they are in terms of the landmass, distance from Taiwan, ROC, or Republic of China, that's Taiwan, troop strength. So Kinmen, as I mentioned, has the largest number of military and also has 60,000 people. Matsu has 2,000. This is rough estimates, okay, 13,000 civilians. Wushu about 400, and then the rest of them basically these two Protus and Itu Abu I mentioned that were more in the South China Sea have no civilians, and Pescadores, which is Penghu, is a large island set. They have over 100,000. So I don't think these large civilian populated areas are really targets that would be convenient for, let's say, an easy win for China, and to make it, let's say, less CNN like, where people are dying. So Here's another shot of Protus Island. You can see that there's 240 nautical miles from Taiwan, 170 from Hong Kong, and 420 from the Philippines. And here's a close-in map of the actual island. There's an island here, and then there's a sort of like a sanctuary, like a reef basically area here. There's actually a runway and a small contingent of Marines there. And the other island set is Taiping Island, or Itu Abu, which is way down in the South China Sea. And here's a picture of it from CSIS Maxar photograph. Right. So let me tell you why I think things are heating up. Okay, so there's a couple of facts. Basically, out of nowhere, the White House announces that Prime Minister Kishida, President Yoon of South Korea are going to meet on the 18th of August. That's one data point. Second, or the more important data point I should have mentioned. Sorry, I didn't frame this correctly. The other important, very important thing, as I mentioned, the visit of Pelosi here, and then Tsai to U.S. The vice president here, Vice President Lai, is going to South America. He's going to Paraguay to the inauguration of the president in Paraguay. He's going to go through the United States, just similar to what President Tsai did in April this year. And China has already expressed its displeasure of the fact that the Vice President Lai is going to be traveling through the United States. He's going to land in New York and then go on to South America, and then come back through San Francisco and then back to Taiwan. If the pattern were the same, it would be basically another, let's say, April of 2022, lots of planes, lots of ships, lots of activity, and no one would probably notice a whole lot of any. People would be normally doing their work here and not really be concerned. But what happens if he uses that opportunity to take the action I just mentioned, take one of these islands as a deception? So I just want to remind the audience, and maybe you know, maybe you don't, but Mao was a very big fan of deception. In his speech on protracted war that he gave in 1938, there's a line in it that says, "In war, there's never enough deception." So we also have to consider that as an angle to all this, is that we've become, let's say, used to the PLA doing something big when there's something big that they don't like. His travel is, he leaves on the 12th of August and comes back on the 18th. So the 18th of August is an important date, because usually when they come back is when the PLA does something. So why would President Biden suddenly want to talk to the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of South Korea? Well, guess what? Those are countries that we have alliances with. We also have a large number of military forces there. About 50,000 or so in South Korea, and about 25,000 in Japan. That's where our main forces are in the Indo-Pacific arena area. So that was a little odd. And actually today, it was announced that President Biden is going to go to Vietnam to upgrade relations with the communist regime in Vietnam, and didn't say the date. Okay, so let's go through some of the military stuff, and let me pull up this map. Okay, so this is a map by CI Geography, and it was up till about a year of aircraft flights that the PLA had done around Taiwan and near Japan. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner, there's a lot of lines, and it's really lit up in the lower left corner. And here's a zoom in of that here, right here. There you go. So you can see here, there's a lot of aircraft flying through the end of 2021. And guess what? It's on the other. It basically splits off the Taiwan Protus area. So there's been a lot of activity there, and some activity between basically splitting the Senkaku Islands that the Japanese have, but not as much as down here. Right. So this map was done by Janes, and they did basically from March of last year to March of this year, all the aircraft patterns. And again, you look at the lower left-hand corner, it's quite messy. And you can see the little Protus Island right there. It says Protus Island. And, these flights are obviously cutting Taiwan, the main island, from Protus Island. So that's part of the military argument. There's been some exercises, and here's just one other thing, sort of the patterns. Here is basically pictures of the different regions around. They've divided it into different regions, the area here east of Taiwan and going clockwise, or I guess the opposite would be along the midline. This midline was formulated by the US and China in the 50s, sort of as a safety line to make sure that people wouldn't react to each other. And then 3 is on the north side, 4 is on the south side, and 5 is on the southwest side. And if you look down here, you can see that things are pretty flat. And then the medium line, there's been a lot of activity starting in 2022. That's the Pelosi visit, massive increase of crossing that midline, and then nothing really not a whole lot in the northeast, not much in the southern. But again, if you look at 5, which is the southeast corner where Protus is, showing the public the flights. Right. So I'm not good. All right. Recently, at the end of August, they also on the Navy side, they did some missile tests off. This is Hainan Island. This is Taiwan right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse? Okay, great. And then up here they did some live fire things. And then they announced also, oh, by the way, the Shandong aircraft carrier is floating around here too. So you've got some naval activity, some testing going on, maybe not so unusual. But again, if you start putting all these things together and you start seeing a pattern of a lot of activity in lots of different dimensions. Now, I have some friends here who monitor the disinformation channels in China. And I asked them if they had seen anything unusual, and they said, yes, actually, there's a lot of unusual activity. I said, well, what is it? They said, usually every year in June, let's say the propaganda machine basically takes June off, or most of June, and then starts up again in July. And they said this year, for the first time, they didn't start up. Basically, they're still down. And the people who are monitoring this are actually a bit worried about this, that they don't know what it means. And so I've been in contact with them, giving them my ideas about what it means. And so we've had lots of conversations. What it could mean is that this is the time before the full-on disinformation campaign could go on. Again, individually, these events might not mean anything, but you start putting them together, you start scratching your head and wondering, well, why are all these things lining up? Right. Okay. So let's see here. Sorry. No, I want to go here. All right. Here's something. Again, I look at patterns. So this year on 3rd of April, when around the time that Tsai met McCarthy in California, we had basically 4 flat tops, either aircraft carrier or a helo carrier in the region, sort of either intentionally or unintentionally, basically telling China to you can do your little exercise, but don't get too excited, right? And then in August, when Pelosi was here, we also had about 4 aircraft carriers or our flat tops in the close vicinity of Taiwan, which is right there. Now, This is a picture of last week, end of July. The two aircraft carriers that are currently in the Indo-Pacific region is the USS Reagan and the Marine amphibious group on the America. It's a helicopter carrier. So they're down in around Australia doing Talisman Sabre exercise with the Australians and 12 other or 11 other, total 13 countries. But they're way down here. There's nothing here near Taiwan. And then the most recent update this week, the Reagan looks like it's steaming pretty quickly up to into the Southeast Asian Sea, and it could be coming to hang out near Taiwan, or it could be coming in response to what's happening in the Philippine Sea, which many of you might have read about in terms of the video you might have seen of the Chinese Coast Guard spraying water with a high pressure water cannon against a Philippine Navy ship. And then the US came out with statements about, any attack on a Philippine naval ship would invoke the treaty that we have with the Philippines. So this aircraft carrier could be, and its associated ships could be coming up to help the Philippines. The problem with all this is that it's possible that the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Navy want the Reagan carrier strike group to show up there and stay in near the Philippines and not go to Taiwan. In other words, divide and conquer. In other words, create a crisis and lock down forces that could be helping Taiwan. And there's not a whole lot of, this is a Coast Guard ship, US Coast Guard ship, that's why it's there. But that's it. There's only two carrier, groups or battle groups nearby. So it's an opportunity for China to do something, because there really isn't anything around in terms of on the Navy side. Now there might be some submarines. Of course, the US Air Force has and Marines and the Navy have bases on Okinawa, and also we have the ability to work with the Philippine government if they agree to use their air bases in the northern part of the Philippines for a response to a Taiwan crisis. But the question is whether or not the US government would respond to something like taking a small island from Taiwan. According to the original mutual defense treaty that we had with Taiwan from 1955 to 1979, those small islands were not part of the treaty. Only Penghu, that one that had like 100,000 people on it, close to Taiwan, and of course the island of Taiwan, was designated as the area that when we had a treaty with Taiwan, we would be willing to fight and help them. So all these other islands, Kinmen, Matsu, Pratas, Itu Abu, they were never part of the treaty. So the question is, if China were to take these islands, would the United States do anything about it? Or would we try to negotiate, a de-escalation type scenario? Another part of this thing on the Navy side, and I'm just talking about the Navy a little bit because I just wanted to emphasize, this is a nice picture, from the Talisman Sword exercise. It's a picture of Australian equivalent of a carrier or a flat top, a Japanese, a South Korean, and a US. But that's also bad because that means they're down near Australia. They're not available to help if there's a crisis around Taiwan, should those governments want to meet. Should these governments want to help Taiwan, they're not really available, at least as of during the exercise, which ended on the 4th of August. So the question is, are these ships steaming quickly up north to get there before something happens in that region? So this was the announcement here of the statement from the White House about the president meeting with the two leaders of Japan and South Korea. And interestingly enough, here's another pattern. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is closed until the 11th of August. The Chinese, the the Chinese, I guess, are on vacation. So if anybody had any questions about what China's intentions are with Taiwan, you know, there's no public way to do it except you could send an email to the press office and they might or might not respond. Another aspect too is Xi Jinping and his group of friends are on vacation, and they're all doing vacation. I think about an hour outside of Beijing. Well, isn't that a wonderful opportunity to plan a campaign? You know, maybe they're getting massages and swimming, but you know, in between all that, they could easily be meeting and planning and conspiring to do something against Taiwan. Our Congress is in recession, or sorry, not recession, is in recess from the end of July until the beginning of September. So Congress is not in session. I also forgot to mention that they also, the social media monitor colleagues I have here, they said that that the propaganda, say disinformation channels are down, but also there are other channels that are not, let's say, one channel that they talked about was usually gets 100,000 hits a day, and it's getting 0. It's not up, it's dead. So that's another indicator. Let's see if I have some other things here. We can talk about some other indicators, but this is a slide I just wanted to sort of give a summary of what I talked about, and we can get into question Q&A. And like I said, there's other trends. For example, the DPRK a couple days ago came out, North Korea came out with a statement saying that you know, the U.S. government providing weapons and help to Taiwan is terrible, and we support whatever China does. So why are they saying that now? Okay, so anyway, so I talked about the motivation, the challenges for Xi Jinping, the most likely course of action. The most dangerous would be an invasion or blockade, which I don't think the PLA is ready for. I really don't think they're ready for that. And it's a very high risk activity for Xi Jinping to do. And if they don't do it, if they're not successful, he's done. So, and of course, they might just do another exercise, and you know, we can they could just do, you know, these are not the droids you're looking for. Just continue on and expect that. But I don't think so. So back to you, Shoshana.
Okay, I'll take it back. And if you would close your shared screen, I can
Sure.
get to some of the questions that we have. But as we get there, you framed what Xi Jinping needs to know in terms of his military and military capabilities. And since we're just speculating, can we speculate on something else? China's
Sure.
having economic problems. China's having all kinds of problems. And there are a lot of people who are not happy with Xi. Is it possible that when you face domestic difficulties, one of the things people sometimes do is head for foreign adventures? So could he be looking for a foreign adventure to he doesn't consider it foreign, he considers Taiwan part of China, but is he looking for an outside adventure to take the heat off himself at home?
Yes, I mean, the economy is tanking. There's also another report came out today about how China's hoarding gold. It's been hoarding it for the last 9 months. They've been hoarding food. Another report came out by the Economist said that they have about 18 months supply of food. They've been buying extra food. You know, 18 months for 1.4 billion people, that's a lot of food. Yeah. You know, you don't do that just because, you know, you're Joseph and you're talking to the Pharaoh. You know, this is real stuff. You know, this is real serious stuff. We also know that Warren Buffett with Berkshire Hathaway pulled out some of his investments in China, and also he zeroed out his investment with TSMC, which is the largest semiconductor company here in Taiwan. He had originally invested $4.1 billion, I think in late fall of last year, and then he pulled it all out in March and April of this year, like pulled it out. So, when people who have lots of money are investing and they take action to take their money out, that's a huge indicator. Another indicator, I talked to a colleague this evening who was telling me that most American companies are pulling out if they can out of China. Not because they're thinking there's a war, but rather because of the treatment they're getting and the inability to conduct business. So basically, it's getting down to the fact that there are companies that are still U.S. companies are still in China, but most of the ones that can leave are leaving or have left. So these are all, again, more indicators that something's up, because people don't want to lose their money.
Right. And these are more indicators that the Chinese economy is going to continue to have trouble, which continues to put the pressure on Xi, which so you can follow that path. So you're sort of saying what General Minahan said in the Air Force back in February, I guess it was, that we're not looking at a 10-year timeline as the US has sort of projected, or less of the 2027 or whatever it is. But General Minahan thinks that we should be prepared to do something in the next 12 to 18 months. I always think it's a good idea when military people want to be prepared ahead of what the problem looks like. So you're positing a possibility that's even faster than General Minahan's.
So the difference, what I'm saying is, I'm talking about a small test of the PLA. He's talking about invasion or blockade or something bigger than what I'm talking about. I think there's going to be there has to be a real world operational test of the capability to demonstrate to Xi Jinping that these people, that the PLA can do their job. So that timeline is different. And just to make a note, a little fine note on that, what General Minahan said, it was a leaked document that wasn't supposed to go out into the press. I actually worked for his father when I was in the Air Force, but anyway, that's a side note. So look, the U.S. military, any military, is supposed to be prepared for anything. It's a Boy Scout on steroids with lots of weapons. You never really want to be in a situation where you're not prepared. And I'm sure that the in the Taiwanese government also has ratcheted up their training since about again, before Tsai, former President Ma reduced the military conscription time from 1 year to 4 months. President Tsai has increased it back to a year starting in January. So once that starts, then the number of active duty military will go up. Again, it's a headache. More military means more headache for the PLA, which means more headache for Xi. So again, that's where I'm getting at, is that that trend, the non-peaceful means trend, is going the wrong way, and he needs to flatten it. So what I predict is he's going to do something and try to negotiate with the US. And one of the things he'll probably do is he'll say, if you want to sit down and talk with me, you need to stop all the training, and you need to stop any weapons shipments to Taiwan, and then we can sit down and talk. If you don't, then I'm going to continue doing something that you don't like.
So this leads us to a question from a listener.
Okay.
And I know you study China, but I know you also look at the United States government. He asks, do you think President Biden would give the go-ahead for the United States to take back or do something about a small island along the lines of what we've done with Ukraine? We've basically committed ourselves to the Ukraine war, as the president says, for as long as it goes on, which could be a long time. Would he do the same for Taiwan if Taiwan wants to get back that island? Or do you think he would negotiate a way out, which would leave Taiwan without its island?
So I think that the Taiwanese people are committed to Pratas Island, for example. I don't think the U.S. military, I don't think that the president would risk spilling U.S. military blood for an island that has no strategic value to the United States. Okay. I mean, they could now, if they had, cojones, they would double down, right? That's another way to respond, is like, oh yeah, you want to do that? We're sending you more US military to Taiwan. We're going to increase the number of weapons sent to Taiwan. Oh, and by the way, Japan and South Korea are going to join up, and we're going to do exercises in the Taiwanese military, so you can go that route, right? I mean, that's my preferred course of action, but I don't think that this government, the current government, especially with Blinken, he's not the kind of guy that likes to talk hard to the PRC. So yeah, I don't really see that. I'm hoping, okay, so I'm hoping that the Reagan carrier strike group is going to go to help Taiwan, but I don't think that if we wanted to, they're going to stop us, because they're going to create a problem with the Philippine Navy, and we're going to have to deal with that. And so I think that even if we wanted to, we're going to be put in these challenging situations where it's going to be difficult for us to really respond in a way to do that. Now, again, Taiwan has an option too, right? They could reinforce those islands. They could put anti-ship missiles. They could make basically those islands like Taiwan, and make it very painful for the PLA to take it.
How long would that take? Is that a long-term proposition, or can you do it fast?
Well, I mean, they have ships and they have airplanes. They have C-130s, and so they could add a lot of people very quickly, and a few ships. They're about 200 miles. They could be there, within 12 hours. Given the fact that they need to load up the ships, so within a couple of days they could easily reinforce those islands. Now the question is, am I right? I mean, they probably don't want to do anything that, and if they're not seeing the indicators I am, they might not do anything at all. So it's I'm not in charge, so I can only make suggestions, and then they can throw them in the trash can. So
But we do have another question from a listener. The Taiwanese can do whatever they want. They are a country. Do you think, asks the listener, that the military and the people of Taiwan have the will and the materiel and the training to deter or to take back the island should you be right and the Chinese actually threaten that island? Are they going to do it? Or are they going to say, wait a minute, without the United States here, I can't do it alone?
So historically, they have done it alone. In the 50s, the Kinmen was a battleground, and the Taiwanese military fought back and prevented the PLA from taking over the island. There was another battle that they lost, and there was no U.S. military involved until after the battle, and then the 7th Fleet showed up and evacuated the survivors, the civilians and some of the POWs that they caught. But the Taiwanese have demonstrated in the past that they have the will and the capability to fight. The question is, how long do they have that ability? Just like the Ukrainians, we're shoving as many weapons as we can and training them as quickly as we can. But if we can't provide those weapons or that training to Ukraine, they would eventually crumble, right? So that's the problem with Taiwan. So a good response, in my opinion, would be to, as General Minahan talked about, is he's in charge of logistics for the Air Force and sending things. So we would have to do something like a Berlin airlift, basically, and ships as quickly as we can to Taiwan and load them up, and increase the training. So we might work with the Taiwanese government. The U.S. could say something like this: okay, you're going to lose, or you've lost products, but we're going to help you make sure that you don't lose the main island and let's say Penghu or other islands. And no, so to answer the other part of the question, there are many Taiwanese people I've talked to that are both willing and able to fight. The question is will they have enough weapons and enough time to get everything ready? If it's just the island and that's all that happens, you know, I don't know if they would fight to the death to get the island back. I don't know that. That's a political decision that I don't know. I don't have a feel for that, honestly. But I do know that they have a very strong feeling towards Pratas and Kinmen and Matsu and all these other islands that are close to China. And the ones, especially the ones that have civilian populations on them. I mean, you know, now there are people who live on those islands who are also, you know, willing to live under communist rule. So, you know, that's another question. That's another issue. But the vast majority of the people here, 86% of the people here want status quo moving towards independence or independence now. The other percentage is like split. The other half of those people that are left over didn't answer the survey, and they've been doing it for like the last 30 years. And about 8% are wanting status quo moving towards unification or unification now. So the percentages are clearly in the favor of the people who want to maintain their democracy.
Which we haven't really talked about, but that is a big motivating factor, I suppose, for the Taiwanese people. They see what living under communist rule looks like next door, and they see they have a democracy, and democracies have their problems. We all do.
But I would also point out that they lived under a dictatorship.
They did.
Also,
they did
from 1949 to the late 80s. So that's like 40 years. So they know what a dictatorship is, and you know their parents, you know, the grandparents or the parents lived under that. And I've met many people who've talked about that, and so they call it the White Terror period, and it was literally terror. You know, they were terrorized. So they know what a dictatorship is, and they also have family. Some of them have family members in China, or they have people working in China, just like the U.S. has Americans in China.
Right.
So they've also seen that. And they've also seen what happened in Hong Kong to the people there. They've also seen what happens to people who speak out of line. There's Taiwanese in jail, just like there are Americans in jail in China. So, you know, everybody knows what it means to be under communist rule. It's just some people maybe think that they can benefit from that if they do the right thing. I don't know.
So here we have a Taiwan mainland question. How well is Taiwan prepared to defend against a biowarfare attack, says the questioner, like the one launched against the world in 2019? Presumably that's COVID-19. How prepared are they for these things?
Okay, so I don't know if you know this factoid, but it was actually Taiwan that tried to warn WHO before anybody else warned WHO that there was something strange happening in China, because they have people in China and they knew something was up. The reason they knew something was up is because they experienced SARS about a decade before. So they were very sensitive. Many countries in Asia are very, let's say, worried about diseases. When I traveled to Singapore, when I traveled to Australia, or you know, especially Singapore, you know, they were very strict about, you know, making sure that you were healthy. This is pre-COVID. Okay, so Asia has been hit by lots of biological, either natural or unnatural agents, and the Taiwanese gave a lot of masks away in the very beginning because they knew what was happening, and so they were ginning up their industry to deal with their own people, and then they made excess and they gave away a lot. And I don't know if you remember, but Secretary of State Pompeo mentioned the fact that in the White House, they were all, in the beginning of the COVID outbreak, they were all wearing Taiwanese masks.
Right.
You know,
they were.
So So yeah, they're prepared, but it depends on what kind of bioweapon it is. I mean, if it's something that kills people 90% of the time, if you get it, then no one's going to be prepared for that.
Right. Okay. Someone just wrote in. I was just in Australia, and the people there are very concerned that with the U.S. Based in the north of Australia, they can be pulled into a war over Taiwan that they don't want.
Right.
Are
Well,
the
listen,
Australians in or are the Australians out?
look, no one wants to be involved in a war. I mean, everybody, I mean, it's a natural instinct. But I had this discussion with another colleague. Some people are saying like, well, if there's a war, if things get hot with Taiwan, we could end up with World War III. Well, my response is really, we can end up World War III with China trying to take the Senkaku, or there's something going on with North Korea and South Korea. I mean, there's a lot of pathways to war, and it's not all the fault of Taiwan. I mean, the Philippine thing could escalate too. I mean, it's currently escalating now. And to be pulled into a war, well, the Australians have voluntarily participated with us in almost every war that we got pulled into ourselves, right? I mean, from World War I onward, many of those wars were not necessarily something that we wanted to get involved with. So, and luckily for Australia, the Japanese didn't take that big island. That would have been a problem, and we were helping defend them against the Japanese. So, I would say that anyone who talks about being pulled into it, I would say, well, if we don't get involved, and if they don't get involved, then their future is determined by their actions. So that's part of the reason why I think that that President Biden announced that he was going to be going to Vietnam to upgrade relations with Vietnam, because Vietnam is realizing they have to make a choice. And I think that's going to be the case of all the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think the better choice is the US, because we actually have lots of we're in a better position to deal with China than China is to try to deal with us, because we have lots of territory in the Pacific Ocean. Besides Guam, besides Hawaii, we have lots of other. We have the 4 compact states, which are countries that, according to the UN, the U.S. government provides for their defense, and we have allies also that, like Australia, and even France has a huge. France has the almost. I think they have 1.5 million people living in the Indo-Pacific, and they have the largest area ocean because of these islands than any other country in the Indo-Pacific. And England, UK has Diego Garcia. They have the former Commonwealth states. They have an alliance with 4 other countries. It's a Commonwealth alliance. So, and there's a lot of cross-cutting alliances that have been established in the last, let's say, couple of years. We had the U.S. government had 4 agreements made with India, so we're one step away from a treaty with India. Japan has made arrangements with Australia and the UK, reciprocal access agreements. So if British warships were to come into Japan, they could get service there. And South Korea and Japan are making up. There's a lot of activity going on the, let's say, the good guy side, and I'm hopeful that over time, again, we have a good trend. We're making alliances with countries that were, let's say, borderline or not convinced. Or in the case of the Philippines, they're actually kind of, rooting for the other side for a little while. So yeah, I think things are looking good. I think that's why Xi Jinping has to do something.
So that's both good news and bad news. If things weren't looking good, he wouldn't necessarily feel the need to do this. So maybe our good news is his bad news, which brings us to the end of our program because we're starting to run over. And this was a great mind exercise. What's happening and what could it be? Most of our speakers come on and they tell us, this is what's real and this is what's not real. But I think this was very important because we have trouble sometimes understanding both our allies and our adversaries. And so I think maybe the best you can do sometimes is put together the tea leaves and see where you come out. And you've done a great job of that. I think you've prompted us to think about what's going on in the region. And for that, I thank you. And it was lovely to see you again. And I appreciate your help to the Jewish Policy Center. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I hope I'm wrong and nothing happens at the end of next week. But
good
the
thought.
the tea leaves are telling me something different.
I hope you're wrong too. I'm going to end on that note. I hope you're wrong. Thank you.